Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are doing something a little different, and honestly, I think it's going to be incredibly high yield for anyone who really wants to understand how we know what we know about the past. We are tackling history, but not just as a list of dates and kings and battles. We're looking at it more like a jigsaw puzzle.
A jigsaw puzzle is a very, very good analogy.
Right. One where maybe half the pieces are missing, a few pieces from a totally different puzzle got mixed in, and the picture on the box is, well, it's a bit faded.
That's a perfect way to put it. It is rarely a straight line. History is messy, it's constantly debated, and it's always being rewritten as we find new pieces to that puzzle.
Exactly. And our guide for this puzzle, our map to navigating this, is none other than Upinder Singh's A History of Ancient and Early Medieval India.
The gold standard.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, for our listeners, especially the Simplified UPSC by PPP community, you already know this book isn't just another textbook.
Not at all.
It's the benchmark. If you want to crack those nuanced conceptual questions in the civil services exam, you just can't memorize facts. You have to understand how history is actually constructed, and that really is our mission today.
Precisely. We're focusing on Chapter 1, Understanding Literary and Archaeological Sources. This is about moving beyond rote learning to actually understanding historiography.
Historiography. So, the history of history writing.
And the craft of the historian, yes.
Yeah.
We're going to, dismantle the engine of history and really see how it works, see what makes it tick.
Okay, I love that. But before we start moving these puzzle pieces around, we do have just a little bit of housekeeping for the Simplified UPSC by PPP family. We want to keep this community growing and thriving.
Of course.
So first off, a direct and very humble appeal to you, the listener. If you find value in this deep dive, if it helps you connect the dots in your prep, please subscribe to the YouTube channel.
It makes a huge difference.
It really does. It boosts retention, and it helps the algorithm get this content out to other serious learners just like you.
And if you are in a position to, please do consider supporting the channel on Patreon. That support is what keeps this high-quality, research-intensive content coming your way.
Yeah.
It genuinely allows us to keep digging this deep.
Absolutely. And on that note, a massive shout out to all of our current supporters. You guys are the real MVPs. You are the ones who make this possible.
We can't thank you enough.
And to everyone listening, please don't forget to like the video and leave your valuable comments. We actually do read them, and we love seeing the discussions that pop up. Also, a quick heads up. Free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs as we call them, are available right now on the public Telegram channel. The link is in the description.
And for those who want to really streamline their prep, if you want the full deep dive experience with all the tools, you can DM the public Telegram channel to join our private library.
Does that get you?
That gives you access to all the videos in this series at once, plus organized premium notes, extra PYQs, and even model mains answers. It's a fantastic resource for this serious aspirant.
Okay, housekeeping done. Let's unpack this. We are diving into Chapter 1. We're looking at texts, coins, inscriptions, and literally digging up the dirt. So where do we start?
We start with the stage, the framework, geography.
Geography. Why do we always have to start with maps?
Because history doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in a void. It happens on a physical stage, and geography often dictates the script.
Okay.
Upinder Singh makes a point to discuss the physical geography of the Indian subcontinent right at the very start. And it's not just about, listing rivers and mountains.
Yeah.
No, it's about how ancient people perceive their own land. You have to understand the limitations and, importantly, the opportunities that the land provided. It shaped everything.
Right, and the text mentions this fascinating concept from the Puranas, this idea of Jambudvipa. It sounds almost mythical.
It is mythical, but it's a myth that's grounded in a specific worldview. It translates to the island of the rose apple tree.
The rose apple tree.
Yes. In Puranic cosmography, the world was often described as 7 concentric continents, each surrounded by a sea.
Okay.
And these weren't just seas of water. We're talking about seas of saltwater, molasses, wine, ghee, curd, milk, and fresh water.
A sea of ghee. That sounds incredibly heavy.
Shuckles. Metaphorically heavy, yes.
Yeah.
But in this cosmic nap, Jambudvipa is the central landmass. It's the heart of it all. And within Jambudvipa, you have a specific region called Bharata-varsha.
And that's the part we'd recognize as the subcontinent, right? The southern part separated by the Himalayas.
Correct. The texts are quite explicit. They define it. The country that lies north of the ocean and south of the snowy mountains is called Bharata.
So it's not just a vague idea.
Not at all. What's so interesting here is that this isn't just fantasy. This is where cosmography, this mythical mapping, blends with actual real-world geography. The texts, the Puranas, they list mountains, rivers, and places that we can actually identify on a modern map. It shows that the composers of these texts had a sense of a larger cultural unit, a kind of civilizational zone, even if the political borders were constantly shifting.
That's amazing. And it connects so well to the modern exam mindset. I mean, you look at UPSC geography questions, and they're always testing your spatial awareness. I'm looking at a source right here, a PYQ from 2013, asking you to match geographical features like the Abyssinian Plateau or the Atlas Mountains to their regions.
A classic UPSC question.
Exactly. It asks you to map the Abyssinian Plateau to Arabia, which is wrong, it's in Ethiopia.
Right.
Or the Atlas Mountains to northwestern Africa, which is correct.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Just as a modern bureaucrat needs to know where the Atlas Mountains are to understand global geopolitics, an ancient historian needs to be able to map these Puranic lists of rivers and mountains to the physical reality of the subcontinent.
So it's about context.
It's all about context. If a text says a king conquered land up to the Mahendra Mountains, you need to know that refers to the Eastern Ghats to understand the actual scale of his empire. The map gives the words meaning.
Okay. So we set the stage, we have the space. Now let's talk about time. Periodization. I feel like most of us grew up learning a very simple timeline. Hindu period, Muslim period, British period. It was so neat and tidy, but Upinder Singh and really all modern historians seem to really dislike that framework. Why is it such a problem?
It's deeply, deeply flawed. And, to be blunt, it's intellectually lazy. Think about where it came from.
James Mill.
James Mill. His book, The History of British India, published way back in 1817. He's the one who popularized this classification. And it relies entirely on the religious affiliation of the ruling dynasty to define an entire age.
Right.
But is that a good metric for history? Does it actually tell you anything useful?
I guess not. I mean, just because a king is, say, a Hindu, that doesn't mean everyone in the kingdom is, or that the economy or society is purely Hindu, whatever that even means in that context.
Exactly. And the term Hindu itself wasn't really used in the ancient period in the way we use it today. It's an anachronism.
Yeah.
Furthermore, did the arrival of a so-called Muslim ruler suddenly change everything for a farmer in a village in the Deccan?
Probably not.
Did the monsoon change?
Yeah.
Did his plow change? Did the local deities he worshipped vanish overnight? Of course not. The continuity is massive.
And what about the bias in the third term? Why is the last period called British and not Christian?
Oh, that's a fantastic point. It's incredibly revealing, isn't it?
It is. It frames the British as these modern secular administrators while defining Indians solely by their religion.
Precisely. It reveals a colonial bias baked into the very structure of the history. It was written to justify British rule as a rational force stepping in to manage religious chaos. It's a narrative of control.
So what's the alternative? What do we use instead?
We shift to terms that are, on the surface, more neutral, but are actually more descriptive of change. Ancient, early medieval, and medieval.
But what do those terms actually mean? They're not just about time, are they?
No, they imply structural changes in society and the economy, not just a change in the religion of the king on the throne. That's the key difference.
Okay, and that term early medieval, that gets thrown around a lot. What are we actually talking about there? It feels a bit fuzzy.
This is a crucial concept for any UPSC learner to grasp. Early medieval usually covers the period from roughly the 6th to the 13th centuries CE. So post-Gupta, pre-Sultanate.
And it's not just a transition period.
Absolutely not. It is not just a dark age or a waiting room for the next big empire. It's a distinct period with its own characteristics. We see the rise of powerful regional states, the Palas in the east, the Pratiharas in the west, the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan.
The famous tripartite struggle.
The tripartite struggle, exactly. We also see major changes in the agrarian structure, what's often debated as Indian feudalism.
Through land grants.
Yes. Land grants creating a new class of intermediaries between the king and the peasant. And we see new religious movements gaining ground, like Bhakti and Tantrism. It's a time of immense regional configuration and cultural creativity.
Okay, that makes sense. And before we leave the timeline, there's one more term from the book. Proto-history. I always get this one mixed up with prehistory.
It is a bit tricky, but here's a simple way to remember it. Prehistory is when you have no written records at all. Stone Age stuff. We only have archaeology.
Okay.
History is when you have readable written records. You have texts you can actually understand.
And proto-history's in the middle.
Proto-history is that awkward middle child. It covers cultures that were literate, but we can't read their writing yet. The classic example is the Harappan civilization.
Right, because we still haven't cracked the Indus script. We have the seals, we see the symbols, but they're silent to us.
Exactly. But, and this is a key point in the book, it also includes the Vedic period.
Wait, why? We have the Vedas. That's literature.
We do. But they were oral traditions for centuries. They were written in the mind, chanted and memorized with incredible precision, but not physically put down on birch bark or palm leaf until much, much later.
So because there are no contemporary written manuscripts from, say, 1500 BCE, it falls under proto-history.
Correct. It's a technical distinction, but an important one. It reminds us that literature and literacy are not always the same thing.
That's a great distinction. Okay, let's move to the meat of the chapter, segment 2. Literary sources. The book calls this the textual lens.
And I think the single most important takeaway here for any student of history is that ancient texts are not mirrors.
Not mirror.
They do not reflect reality perfectly. They are, as the book says, refracted images.
Refracted, you mean like when you put a stick in a glass of water and it looks bent?
Yes, that is the perfect analogy. The text is the stick. The water that bends the image is the author's bias, the intended audience, the patron who paid for the text to be written.
So every text has an agenda.
Every text has a purpose. Maybe it's a ritual manual. Maybe it's a poem to praise a king. It wasn't written to give us a neutral statistical abstract of the year 500 BCE.
And we also have to remember how they were physically preserved. Yeah. These were manuscripts handwritten on, what was it, birch bark?
Birch bark, Bhujapatra, and palm leaf Talapatra.
And copying things by hand for 1,000 years, I can only imagine how many typos creep in.
We call them scribal errors, but it's much more than just typos. Verses get added over time to update a text. Lines get dropped. A scribe might honestly think, this story needs a better moral at the end, and just writes one.
Wow.
So what we read today is often the final product of centuries of editing. It's like a Wikipedia page that's been edited for 2,000 years, but we can't see the edit history. That's the challenge.
Okay, so with that massive caveat in mind, let's look at the big ones, the Vedas. We have the 4: Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva.
Correct. And in the Brahmanical tradition, these are classified as Shruti.
Shruti meaning that which has been heard.
Yes. They are considered eternal, revealed truths not composed by humans. Everything else, the epics, the Puranas, the Dharmashastras, is Shruti.
That which is remembered.
Right. So Shruti is seen as having the highest theological authority.
And for a historian,
the Vedas are our main textual source for the society in the Indo-Gangetic Divide and the Upper Ganga Valley during the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE. But, as we said, dating them with any precision is a nightmare because of that long oral transmission.
So we're reading between the lines.
Constantly, we are analyzing hymns dedicated to Agni or Indra to try and figure out what kind of cattle they kept or what their chariots were made of or how their kinship structures worked. It's all incidental history.
Speaking of texts that are a nightmare to date, let's talk about the epics. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Everyone knows these stories. They are in many ways the bedrock of Indian culture. But can we use them as history?
This brings us to a really brilliant distinction made by the historian Romila Thapar, which Upinder Singh discusses in the chapter. She distinguishes between embedded history and externalized history.
Okay, let's unpack that. Embedded versus externalized. What's the difference?
Embedded history is when a society's historical consciousness is hidden or embedded inside other forms of literature like myth, genealogy, and epic poetry.
So it's not trying to be a history book.
Not at all. But it preserves memories. The Mahabharata is the classic example of embedded history. It might preserve the memory of a real historical tribal war, but that memory is wrapped in countless layers of mythology, philosophy, and additions.
An externalized history.
That's when a society explicitly tries to write a chronicle of events, a biography of a king, for instance, or a history of a dynasty. It has a clear historical intent.
So the Mahabharata is embedded, but people have definitely tried to find the real Hastinapura, right? I mean, archaeologists have gone looking for these places.
They absolutely have. And this is where it gets really interesting and where we see the tension between text and archaeology. Excavations were carried out at a site called Purana Kila in Delhi, which is traditionally associated with Indraprastha from the Mahabharata.
And what did they find?
They found a cultural layer with a specific type of pottery called painted grayware, or PGW. And PGW is often linked archaeologically to the later Vedic period, the general time frame of the epic's core story.
So, there's a match.
It's tempting to say so, but you cannot simply layer the text onto the dirt. It's not that simple.
Why not, if the pottery is there and the text says the city is there?
Because the text is a multi-layered poetic creation that grew over centuries. The Mahabharata, as we have it, describes a colossal war with millions of soldiers, divine weapons, massive palaces. The archaeology of the PGW level shows a society of people living in wattle and daub huts, using fairly simple iron tools.
So the material reality is much more modest than the epic description.
Much more modest. You can't just say, level X in the ground equals verse Y in the book. Archaeology tells us about material culture, what pots they used, what houses they built. It cannot confirm if a specific hero named Arjuna fought a specific battle on a specific date.
It's like trying to prove the existence of King Arthur by digging up a medieval castle. You find the castle, but you don't find the round table itself.
That is a perfect analogy. And speaking of specific locations and their histories, this connects beautifully to how UPSC asks questions. They love testing these specific associations. Look at that 2013 PYQ on rock-cut architecture. It asks about the Barabar rock-cut caves and the Badami caves.
Oh, right. It asks if the Badami caves are the oldest surviving rock-cut caves in India.
Which is wrong. Barabar is older.
Right. And it also asks if the Barabar caves were made for the Ajivikas by Emperor Chandragupta Maurya, which is also tricky.
It's very tricky. The Barabar caves were for the Ajivikas, that part's correct. But they were mostly donated by Ashoka and his grandson Dasaratha, not Chandragupta.
I see.
The point is, just as the exam demands that you know the specific historical context of a physical site like Barabar, a historian has to be incredibly careful about linking a physical site like Purana Kila to a textual tradition like the Mahabharata. You have to verify those associations independently. You can't just assume.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, moving on from the epics to the Puranas, these are the texts that gave us all those long lists of kings, right? The genealogy.
Yes, the Vamshanucharita sections.
Yeah.
These genealogies of kings are, for a historian, the most directly historical part of the Puranas. They list dynasties like the Mauryas, the Sungas, the Guptas. They are invaluable, even if the timelines are sometimes a bit jumbled.
But the Puranas also introduce a massive cosmological concept, which the book highlights, the idea of time.
Time is cyclic.
The yugas.
The 4 ages, Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. We are in the Kali Yuga now, supposedly. We are. And this is a very different view of history compared to the modern linear timeline of progress. It's a vision of vast, repetitive cycles of creation and destruction. It suggests that history repeats itself, which is a very philosophical take on time.
And then we have the rule books, the Dharmashastras, Manusmriti, and so on. These are so often cited to describe how rigid the caste system was, or what the rules for society were.
The Shastras, yes. And here, the expert caution for the book is absolutely vital. These are normative texts.
Normative, meaning they describe the norm, the ideal.
They tell you what should happen, according to a very specific worldview, the Brahmanical elite male worldview. They do not necessarily describe what actually happened in the day-to-day lives of most people.
So just because the text says, for instance, do not cross the sea or you will lose your caste, it doesn't mean that people weren't crossing the sea.
Exactly. We know for a fact they were crossing the sea. We have overwhelming archaeological evidence of Roman trade, Southeast Asian trade, so there's a huge gap between the theory of the Dharmashastra and the practice of the society.
That is such a crucial distinction, normative versus descriptive. If you mistake one for the other, you get a completely wrong picture of ancient India.
Completely wrong. You mistake the ideal for the real.
Okay, so that's the Brahmanical side of the library. But of course, ancient India was never just one voice. Which brings us to segment 3. Non-Brahmanical and secular literature.
This is where the picture gets so much richer, so much more diverse. We have the huge corpus of Buddhist and Jaina texts.
And language becomes a big differentiator here, doesn't it?
It's a huge differentiator. While the Brahmanical tradition increasingly locked into Sanskrit, which became very refined, elite, courtly language, the early Buddhist literature used Pali, and the Jaina texts used various forms of Prakrit, like Ardhamagadi.
And these were languages that were closer to what people actually spoke on the street.
Much closer. It was a conscious choice to make the teachings more accessible to the common person.
And the content. For the Buddhist texts, what should we be looking at?
Well, the core of the Buddhist canon is the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets, the Vinaya, Sutta, and Abhidhamma Pitakas. But for a social historian, One collection is an absolute gold mine, the Jatakas.
The Jatakas. I remember reading some of these as fables when I was a kid.
Many of us did. They're stories of the Buddha's previous births, but look past the main narrative and focus on the background details.
Okay.
In these stories, the Buddha-to-be appears as a merchant, a craftsman, a caravan leader, even an animal. These stories are populated by ordinary villagers, city dwellers, guilds of artisans, traders. They give us a glimpse into the social and economic history that the courtly Sanskrit texts often ignore. They show us the economy in action.
I love that. It's history from the bottom up, not just from the king's court down.
Precisely.
And there's one specific text mentioned in the source that really stood out to me, the Therigatha.
Ah, yes. The Therigatha. This is an incredible text.
Why is it so special?
It means Songs of the Elder Nuns. It is one of the very few early Indian texts where we hear women's voices directly. Not women being talked about by men, but women speaking their own truth, their own experiences, their own path to enlightenment. It's incredibly rare and powerful.
There's that quote from the nun Ubiri. She's mourning the death of her daughter Jiva, and the Buddha helps her find peace. She says, "The arrow is out." It's just so raw and personal.
It humanizes the history completely. It shows us that the great philosophical quest for liberation wasn't just for men or elites. These were real women dealing with profound loss, grief, and the struggle for spiritual freedom.
And from a UPSC perspective, I imagine knowing about specific texts like the Therigatha or the Mahavastu is what separates a top-tier answer from a generic one.
Absolutely. It shows depth. It shows you've gone beyond the surface level.
Okay, let's move south to the Sangam literature.
The great classical literature of the ancient Tamil country, a source of immense pride, and rightly so. The legend speaks of 3 Sangams, or assemblies of poets, held at Madurai and Kapatapuram.
Assemblies that supposedly lasted for thousands of years, attended by gods and sages.
The duration and the divine attendance, yes, that's the mythical framing. But the corpus of literature itself, the collections known as the Etutokai and the Patupatu, is very, very real.
And it's divided into 2 main genres, right? Akam and Puram.
Yes. Akam is the interior world. It deals with love, emotions, family, the private life. It's about the heart.
And Puram.
Puram is the exterior world. It deals with war, kings, heroism, community, public life. It's about the world outside the home. And these poems are our primary window into the early history of the Deep South.
The history of the Muvendar.
The 3 crowned kings, the Cheras, the Cholas, and the Pandyas. Without Sangam literature, our knowledge of them would be a tiny fraction of what it is.
And this connects to that tribal and regional aspect again. I'm looking at another PYQ here from 2013 again, matching tribe to state. For example, Limbu in Sikkim, or the Dongaria Khand in Odisha.
That's a great connection to make. The Sangam texts describe a very complex society where tribal chieftaincies and more organized state-level systems were coexisting and constantly interacting. It wasn't a monolith.
The concept of thyni is important here too, right? The ecozones.
The 5 ecozones, yes. Each landscape, the mountains, the forests, the coast, the arid lands, the agricultural plains, had its own people, its own economy, its own culture. Just as a modern administrator needs to understand the specific identity of the Dongaria Khand or the Karbi, the historian uses Sangam texts to understand the specific cultural ecology of the ancient Tamil lands. It's all about regional history.
Okay, let's turn to biographies. Charitas. We talked about externalized history earlier. This seems to fit that bill perfectly.
It does, and the most famous example is Banapada's Harsha Karita, the biography of the 7th century king, Harsha of Kannauj.
But the big question is always, is it history? Or is it just flattery?
It's both. That's the challenge. It is externalized history, so it has a definite historical core. It tells us about Harsha's ancestry, his rise to power, his campaigns. But Bana was Harsha's court poet.
So he's not exactly going to be an objective reporter.
Not even close. He writes about the goddess of royal prosperity, Lakshmi, physically embracing Harsha before he goes into battle. It's highly romanticized, filled with incredible literary flourishes. He's never going to tell us about Harsha's bad days or his policy failures.
Now, contrast that with Kalhana.
Ah, Kalhana. He's a fascinating figure. He wrote the Rajatarangini, which means the River of Kings, in the 12th century. It's a history of Kashmir.
And he's often called India's first true historian in the modern sense. Why is that?
Because he explicitly talks about his method, right in the introduction. He says a true historian should be like a judge impartial, free from love or hate. And he didn't just repeat old stories. He says he examined older chronicles, royal edicts, land grant inscriptions, and even coins to correct errors in the traditions he inherited.
That sounds incredibly modern. cross-referencing and verifying your sources.
It is. He was consciously trying to be objective, even though his work still includes legends and supernatural events. But the intent to critically examine and verify his facts was there. He understood that you can't just believe everything you read or hear.
Okay, that's a perfect transition. From insiders writing about their own world to segment 4, the outsider's gaze. Foreign accounts.
Yes, because sometimes you need an outsider to notice the things that the locals take for granted.
The fish doesn't notice the water.
Exactly. The local is the fish. They don't see the water. The outsider comes in and sees everything. But, and this is a huge but, the outsider also brings their own cultural baggage, their own lens, their own misunderstandings.
Let's start with the Greeks. Megasthenes, the ambassador to the Mauryan court. He wrote the Indica.
He did. Or he wrote a book called the Indica.
What do you mean? We don't actually have the Indica, do we?
No, we don't. And this is a crucial point for any student doing source criticism. The original work is lost. We only have fragments and summaries quoted by later Greek and Roman writers like Arrian, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus.
So it's a double filter.
A double filter, exactly. First, you have Megasthenes himself seeing India through Greek eyes. He famously described Indian society as having 7 classes, or genia, philosophers, farmers, soldiers, and so on.
Which doesn't quite map onto the 4 Varna system.
Not neatly, no. He was trying to fit what he saw into familiar Greek categories. So that's the first filter. Then you have the second filter of these later writers who were summarizing or quoting Megasthenes for their own purposes centuries later. It's like a game of historical telephone played over 2,000 years. We have to be very, very careful with it.
Okay, what about the Chinese pilgrims? They came with a different agenda. They were here for religion, not diplomacy.
Primarily, yes. The 2 most famous are Faxian, who came in the Gupta period, and Xuanzang, who came during Harsha's reign.
And their accounts are invaluable for understanding the state of Buddhism in India at the time.
Invaluable. They were pilgrims. They were visiting the holy sites, collecting manuscripts, studying at the great monastic universities like Nalanda. Xuanzang's account of Nalanda is incredibly detailed.
But they also commented on society in general.
They did. Xuanzang, for instance, gives very detailed notes on the caste system and even mentions that untouchables, as he called them, had to sound wooden clappers when entering a city so that others could avoid them. It's a sobering first-hand account.
And again, chronologically, this is a favorite UPSC trap question. Who visited during whose reign?
Always.
Yeah.
Connecting the traveler to the king is a classic question format. You cannot mix them up. Faxian with Chandragupta II, Xuanzang with Harsha, it's non-negotiable.
And then we have Al-Biruni.
Al-Biruni is in a league of his own. His work, The Taki Hind, or An Inquiry into India, is just remarkable.
He wasn't just a traveler.
Not at all. He was a polymath, a true scholar. He came to India in the 11th century with the armies of Mahmud of Ghazni. But instead of just observing or looting, he learned Sanskrit, a very difficult thing to do.
So he could read the primary sources himself.
He could, and he studied Indian mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, religion, social customs. He was critical. He famously said that the Indian scholars of his day were insular, that they believe there is no country like theirs and no science like theirs. But he also had a deep respect for the knowledge itself. His work is an analytical text, not just a travelogue.
Okay, let's put the books down for a moment and pick up a shovel. Segment 5. Archaeology. The Spade Speaks.
Indeed. Archaeology is the study of the human past through its material remains. And for the vast stretches of prehistory, it's our only source of information. And for the historical period, it's a vital independent check on the literary texts.
Texts can lie, but the dirt usually doesn't.
The dirt doesn't have an agenda. Now, the most fundamental concept in archaeology is stratigraphy.
The law of superposition.
Exactly. Put simply, the stuff at the bottom is older than the stuff at the top. When people live in one place for centuries or millennia, the settlement rises on the accumulated debris of previous generations. This forms a mound or a tell. Archaeologists then slice through that mound like a layer cake to see the sequence.
And how do we put dates on those layers? You can't just look at a piece of pottery and know it's from 2000 BCE.
No, we need scientific techniques for that. The most famous is radiocarbon dating, or carbon-14 dating.
That works on organic stuff, right?
Only on organic stuffed charcoal from a hearth, a piece of bone, seeds. It works by measuring the steady rate of decay of the radioactive isotope carbon-14 after an organism dies. For things like fired pottery, which is inorganic, we use other methods like thermoluminescence or TL dating.
And understanding these techniques is actually relevant for the general studies papers too, isn't it? I've seen science and tech questions on heritage conservation or dating methods pop up.
Absolutely. The exam often bridges these disciplines. Knowing how we know the date of a site is just as important as knowing what was found there. If you understand the principles of C14, you know its limitations. It only works on organic matter up to about 50,000 years ago.
One really cool concept mentioned in the text is ethnoarchaeology. What's that about?
This is a fascinating subfield. It's when archaeologists study living communities to better understand the past.
How does that work?
The logic is that traditional technologies and ways of life can sometimes survive for millennia with very little change. The classic example that Upinder Singh gives in the book is the study of bead making in Kambat, which is in Gujarat.
They still make stone beads there today.
They do, using techniques that are remarkably similar to ancient ones.
Hmm.
So by watching a modern craftsman, by observing how they chip the raw stone, how they drill the tiny hole, how they polish the final bead, archaeologists can better interpret the tools and the debitage, the waste material they find in Harappan bead-making workshops from 4,000 years ago.
Wow. It brings the artifacts to life. It stops being just a stone and becomes a living process.
Exactly. It connects the present directly to the past.
All right, let's move from the dirt to stone. Segment 6. Epigraphy. History written in stone and metal.
Inscriptions. And for many historians, these are the most reliable source for political history.
Why the most reliable?
Because, unlike a manuscript that can be copied and altered over centuries, once you carve something into a rock or a pillar, it generally stays there. It is a contemporary, dated record. It's fixed in time.
Unless someone comes and carves something else over it.
Well, that happens too, but the message itself is a snapshot. Now, for early India, we have two main scripts we need to know, Brahmi and Kharoshthi.
Brahmi is the big one, the mother script.
It is the mother script of almost all modern Indian and many Southeast Asian scripts. Devanagari, Tamil, Bengali, Telugu, Tibetan, they all trace their ancestry back to Brahmi. And its decipherment by James Prinsep in 1837 was the single most important breakthrough in the study of ancient India.
Before that, Ashoka's pillars were just mysterious columns with writing nobody could read.
Exactly. After Prinsep, they spoke. And they told us about a great emperor named Ashoka and his philosophy of Dhamma. Kharoshthi was used mainly in the Northwest, in modern Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it was written right to left, showing the influence of Aramaic from the Persian Empire.
We have to talk about the Allahabad pillar. This thing is just an unbelievable artifact. It's like a historical timeline in physical form.
It's what we call a palimpsest,
Yeah.
something that has been written on and erased and written over again. It is a stunning, stunning object.
So what are the layers?
It was originally an Ashokan pillar, erected in the 3rd century BCE, carrying his message of peace and Dhamma.
Okay, layer 1.
Then, about 600 years later, in the 4th century CE, the Gupta emperor Samudragupta had his court poet Harisena compose a long Prasasti eulogy of his military conquests and had it carved right onto the same pillar.
Wow. That's quite a contrast. A message of peace and a message of war on the exact same stone.
The irony is incredible, isn't it? And then, much, much later, in the 17th century, the Mughal Emperor Jahangir added his own inscription. 3 great emperors, Mauryan, Gupta, Mughal, all claiming the same symbolic axis of power.
It visually represents the continuity of power and sovereignty in the subcontinent. It's like a political baton being passed across millennia on one object.
That's a great way to put it.
And what about the land grants? Those copper plates, the Tamrapatra?
Ah, yes. These are crucial for economic and social history. These were essentially legal documents. They recorded grants of land or the revenue from land to brahmanas or to temples.
And they tell us more than just who got the land.
So much more. They tell us about the agrarian structure, the types of crops grown, the taxes people paid, the irrigation systems, and the spread of state society into previously forested or tribal areas. This is the primary evidence that fuels the whole massive debate on Indian feudalism.
Right. When kings started giving away land rights and administrative rights to these religious grantees, did it weaken the state? Did it create a class of serfs?
All of those questions. And the answers, or the arguments for them, are found in the details of these copper plates.
Okay, from land to money. Segment 7, Numismatics, the story of coins.
Coins are incredible little data packets. They are political statements you can carry in your pocket.
The earliest ones were the punch-marked coins.
Yes, mostly silver, some copper. They didn't have any writing. They just had various symbols, the sun, the hill, animals, punched onto them. We're not even sure which symbol belongs to which dynasty for many of them.
And then the Indo-Greeks came and completely changed the game.
They did. They brought the Hellenistic tradition of coinage with them. And that meant 2 things: a realistic portrait of the ruler and a legend.
A legend meaning the name of the king.
The name of the king, his titles, written in Greek and often in local script like Brahmi or Kharoshthi on the other side.
Yeah.
Suddenly we could put a face to a name. We see kings like Menander, Eucratides. It revolutionizes the history of that period.
And after them, the Kushanas.
The Kushanas gave us some of the first large-scale issues of gold coins. And what's fascinating is the incredible variety of deities on their coins. You have the Buddha, you have Shiva with his bull Nandi, but you also have Greek, Iranian, and Zoroastrian gods.
All on coins issued by the same dynasty. What does that tell us?
It shows a tremendous religious syncretism. It tells us the Kushan king was positioning himself as the ruler of a vast multicultural empire. He was saying, I am the ruler of all these peoples and I respect all their gods. It's a political message of inclusion.
And the Guptas. Their coins are famous for their artistry.
The golden age of Indian numismatic art. The archer type, showing the king as a great warrior. The tiger slayer type, and my personal favorite, the Veena player type, showing Samudragupta, the great conqueror, sitting and playing a musical instrument.
It was propaganda, but it was beautiful propaganda. It showed the king as a complete man-of-warrior and an artist.
Precisely.
But then the book discusses a debate about the paucity of coins in the period after the Guptas. What's that about?
Yes. In the early medieval period, the historian R.S. Sharma famously argued that the relative scarcity of coins from this era was evidence of a decline in long-distance trade and the decay of cities. The urban decay hypothesis.
Is that the consensus?
It's heavily debated. Other historians argue that trade didn't decline, it just changed. Maybe people were using different mediums of exchange, like credit networks or cowrie shells, which don't survive in the archaeological record, as well as metal coins. It's an active debate, but it shows how corns, or even the lack of them, can be used to construct a major theory about the entire economy.
Okay. This brings us to the final and maybe the hardest part. Segment 8. Synthesis. How do you put it all together? Correlating the texts and the archaeology.
This is the ultimate jigsaw puzzle challenge we started with, because very often the literary text says one thing and the archaeological evidence seems to say something completely different. They don't always line up neatly.
And the classic example of this is the so-called Aryan problem.
Yeah. It is the biggest and most contentious problem in ancient Indian history. On one hand, you have the linguistic evidence of the Vedas, a collection of texts that describe a pastoral, cattle-herding culture focused on the horse and chariots centered in the northwest of the subcontinent.
Okay. That's the textual evidence.
On the other hand, you have the archaeological evidence of the Harappan civilization, which existed in the same geographical region. It was a highly organized, urban, brick-built civilization with extensive trade networks, but which, at least initially, didn't seem to have the horse as a central part of its culture in the way the Vedas do.
So how do you reconcile those two pictures? Are they the same people at different stages? Are they different groups? Did one migrate and encounter the other?
These are the questions that historians and archaeologists have been fighting over for 100 years. And Upinder Singh's advice in the book is very wise. She says we shouldn't try to force them to fit.
Don't force the puzzle piece if it doesn't fit.
Exactly. She advocates for juxtaposition. Place the two bodies of evidence, the literary and the archaeological side by side. Acknowledge the gap, acknowledge the contradictions. Don't twist the archaeology to try and prove the text or dismiss the text because it doesn't match the potsherds.
If they don't match, maybe the answer right now is just they don't match.
And being comfortable with that ambiguity, with that uncertainty, is the mark of a mature historical mind.
That is such a critical thinking skill for a UPSC aspirant. You have to be comfortable with nuance and ambiguity. The world is not black and white.
It's the bureaucrat's mindset, isn't it? In your career, you will receive conflicting reports from different departments. Your job isn't to pick the one you happen to like more. Your job is to critically evaluate the potential bias of each source, weigh the evidence, and construct the most likely reality to make an informed decision.
Acting on the best available evidence, knowing that the full, perfect picture might still be hidden.
That's the job.
Which brings us to the big so what question. Why does this all matter for a future bureaucrat? Why spend so much time on ancient sources?
It matters because this process, the process we've just discussed, trains the mind. It trains you to evaluate evidence, to spot biases, to understand complexity, and to appreciate that there are multiple perspectives on every story. You cannot govern a diverse and complex country like India if you don't understand the multiple layered stories of its people.
And that leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought for you to take away from this. We've talked about all these sources, texts written by Brahmins and monks, coins minted by kings, inscriptions carved for emperors. But what about the unwritten histories?
Mm.
What about the history of the non-literate majority, the tribal communities, the marginalized castes, the women who weren't nuns and didn't have their voices recorded in a Therigatha?
Archaeology finds them. It's the great democratizer. It finds their humble pots, their simple tools, their cooking hearths. The texts written by elites often ignore them completely. They are the silent majority of the past.
So the question to leave you with is this. How does that silence shape our understanding of the past? And how does it shape our modern identity? Are we missing 90% of the story because we have, for centuries, only been listening to the 10% who knew how to write?
A powerful thought to end on.
It is. Okay, before we sign off, a final quick reminder for our Simplified UPSC by PPP listeners. If this deep dive helped you see the matrix, if it connected some dots for you, please do subscribe and like the video. It really helps the algorithm, and it helps us help you.
And again, a very humble request for Patreon support if you are in a position to do so. It is what sustains this mission and allows us to keep decoding these crucial texts for you.
And remember, if you want that premium experience, all the organized notes, the extra PYQs, the model answers we talked about, just DM us on the Telegram public channel to join the private library. It really is worth it for a streamlined preparation.
Keep learning, and most importantly, keep questioning.
See you in the next deep dive.